The topic that we are dealing with today is simplifying algebraic fractions. So in this case, the question is simplify the following expression. 16x squared minus 25 divided by 5 minus 4x. So whenever we are simplifying an algebraic fraction, the first thing that we must do is to know the type of the expression that you have in the numerator as well as the one in the denominator, right? This is important so that we can then be able to factorize the numerator and factorize the denominator so that we can reduce it to its lowest term. We cannot reduce a fraction without factorizing the expression in the numerator and the factor in the denominator. So we must make sure that we factorize the numerator and denominator first before we simplify it or before we reduce it to the lowest term. Now, if you check, I've just copied this expression down here so that we can then simplify it. Now, if we check, our first term in the numerator is 16x squared. And the second one is negative 25. So if we check the two terms in the numerator, they are all perfect squares, which means we are looking at difference of two squares. Now, it becomes easier for us now to factorize difference of two squares. Remember, whenever we are dealing with difference of two squares, it is now very easy. What we just have to do now is simply to have brackets in place. Then we must know the number that we are squaring so that we come up with 16x squared. That number that we are squaring to come out 16x squared, remember it's what? It's 4x. So I'm going to distribute the 4x into brackets, right? Then I'm also going to distribute the number that I'm squaring to come up with 25. The number that I'm squaring to come up with 25 is what? Is 5. So I'll distribute 4x in each bracket, then I'll distribute 5 in each what? Bracket. Now, difference of two squares, then we have our numbers. Remember, we are squaring 4x, so I distribute 4x. So I have 4x, and I'm also going to write 4x here, right? Then from there, I'm going to distribute what? 5. I'll distribute what? 5 in my two brackets. There we go. Now, I've distributed the numbers that we are squaring, right? So I'm squaring 4x and I'm squaring 5. So after distributing the numbers that I'm squaring, I must then put a positive in one of the bracket and a negative in the other bracket. This is only true for a difference of two squares. So we are factorizing the difference of two squares. So it's only true for a difference of two squares. So which means we are going to put, say, for example, in this case, I'll put what? Plus in here. Then in this other one, I'm going to put what? Negative, right? Right. So if you expand this, 4x plus 5 multiplied by 4x minus 5, you go back to the difference of two squares. So that's our first, that's our numerator. Then we move on to the denominator. You can see in our denominator, we are having 5 minus 4x. So 5 minus 4x has a common factor 1, right? So whenever we are dividing or multiplying by 1, the number doesn't change. So it means I'm just going to put what? Brackets. Right? I'll just put what? Brackets. That's how I factorize my denominator. Right. So that's the number that I am going to come up with. I factorized my denominator. I factorized my numerator. The next thing now that I must do is to look for a common factor in the numerator and denominator so that I can simplify them. Right? If you check, the first factor in the numerator is 4x plus 5. It's not the same as the one in the denominator. They are different, right? Then check again the second factor in the numerator is compared to the factor in the denominator. You can see here that we're having positive 4. This one is negative 4. This one is negative 5, and the denominator is positive 5. So we can say these two factors, the one in the numerator and one in the denominator, they are opposite. Why are we saying they are opposite? Because 4x is positive in the numerator and it's negative in the denominator. 5 is negative in the numerator and we have positive 5 in the denominator. So we can say this bracket is opposite of the factor in the denominator. So I can then factor out negative from the one in the denominator so that it is the same as the one in the numerator. So let me then factorize it by using what? 1. I'm going to use a factor of what? 1. Now, right, I'm factorizing negative so that my denominator will be exactly the same as the second factor in the numerator. So take out negative. Right, whenever we factor out negative 1, remember, it's only the operation that changes. The numbers will still remain the same because we are factorizing what? Negative 1. So 5 was positive. So when we factor out negative, it will become what? Negative 5. Then negative 4x, right, that we have here, after factorizing it, it is going to be what? Positive 4x. Then from there, I'm now going to rearrange my numbers so that the two factors are exactly the same. So I'm just going to rearrange the one in the denominator. Rearranging. I'm going to start by writing the one that is positive now, because in the second factor in the numerator, we are starting with the one which is positive. So I'll start with 4x minus 5. Now, our factors are now exactly the same. So the next thing that we are going to do is now to reduce it to the lowest term now. Right? Then, for us to simplify it or to reduce it to the lowest term, we have to identify factors that are exactly the same. That is a factor in the numerator and the factor in the denominator. So here you can see here that we are having factor 4x minus 5, this one here, and it's exactly the same as the one in the denominator. So it simply means then this factor has to be cancelled. Then it's cancelled together with this one here. Right? So what do we now have at the end of the day? Right, we can now see that we are having an expression which is 4x plus 5 divided by the negative, right? So whenever we are dividing by a negative 1, the number doesn't change. What only change is the operation. So it's positive divided by negative. We are going to come up with what? Negative. We are going to come up with negative, right? Which means our bracket becomes what? Negative. Now, since we are having negative bracket, then going back to our question, it says simplify. So it means we must make it as simple as possible. We must then have to remove the brackets, which means our final answer is going to be negative then negative times positive, it will then give us negative 5. Then that is now our final answer.